Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles featuring in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the examination point of view. So let's take up the important article for today's discussion. The important articles which feature in the Hindu newspaper are on our screens. Let's take up the first article for the day. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads, Antarctic Bill passed in the Lok Sabha or LS. Now this becomes an important article from the perspective of GS2, where we study the laws and the parliamentary acts that are passed. So the new act that has been passed in the monsoon session of parliament that is going on is the Antarctic Bill, which is now passed in the Lok Sabha and is yet to be passed in the Rajya Sabha. So what exactly is this Antarctic Bill? What does the government intend to do with this bill? We'll take a look at it. So first of all, before talking about the Antarctic Bill, obviously it means that it is dealing with the continent of Antarctica. But why is India keen on dealing with the continent of Antarctica and making a law on this? So because India is a signatory to the Antarctic Treaty of 1963. Now this Antarctic Treaty is an international law or piece of legislation which deals with the usage of resources of the continent of Antarctica by all the countries in a peaceful and cooperative manner. So therefore, this Antarctic Treaty was signed among 54 countries, of which India is also a signatory. So how does the treaty define Antarctica? All the land and ice shelves to the south of the 60-degree latitude, and it features a 14 million square kilometer plus no indigenous population plus global commons plus principles of peace, science and environmental protection. What this means is that this continent of Antarctica is taken as whole of the subject matter of the treaty, and this treaty talks about, as I said, about the cooperative and a wholesome use of the resources of Antarctica, wherein no population is living, and this resource of Antarctica is called as a global common, which means that it belongs to everyone, and the principles of peace, science and environmental protection are to be followed while exploring this continent of Antarctica. So 54 countries are a part of this treaty and India is a signatory to this treaty as well. So what are the provisions of the Atlantic Treaty? The provisions of the Atlantic Treaty which intends to protect the continent of Antarctica and to ensure the global cooperation on the exploration of this continent says that the Antarctica should be used only for peaceful purposes and no country should build any military bases, right? This is the first provision that the treaty adds, that this continent would be only used by all countries for peaceful purposes and no military activity should go on in the continent. Second is that the freedom of scientific investigation in Antarctica. Now the continent of Antarctica is of quite crucial significance, scientific significance, because it has a lot of resources. It has the region of permafrost which the scientists are interested to study. So the continent has a lot to offer for the scientists. So the treaty provides freedom of scientific investigation for all such activities as long as they are done with permission and they are done peacefully. And no country should claim sovereignty over Antarctica and on the basis of setting up of research stations. So including India, many other countries have research stations situated in the Antarctica. But just because they have the research station, the treaty says that no country should claim sovereignty over Antarctica, right? Which means that no country can claim Antarctica as a part of their own territory, and no nuclear explosions or disposal of radioactive waste should be done in this particular landmass to protect the landmass from and to conserve it. And next is the countries to take appropriate efforts to abide by the provisions of the treaty. Here is where the need for promulgating a national legislation or a domestic law on this treaty comes into place, where whatever provisions are being highlighted in the International Antarctic Treaty, all the countries need to formulate a domestic law to abide by the same. And for that purpose, India is promulgating the Antarctic bill in the Lok Sabha, which has been recently passed. So now talking about India and Antarctica, what are the various important points related to India and Antarctica, and how is India interacting with this landmass? So India signed the Antarctic Treaty in 1983, not at the start but later on in 1983, and it ratified the Convention on the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources in 1985. And then it signed a protocol. What is a protocol? What is a convention? So convention is a agreement or a piece of international law, and protocol, one can say, is an addition to that convention or a addition to that agreement which was earlier signed. So protocol on environment protection to the Antarctic Treaty in 1998. So if Antarctic Treaty signed in 1963 is the parent international law, the protocol on environmental protection to the Antarctic Treaty becomes a addition to that agreement. Certain new modifications can be done to the treaty. So those modifications are done in the form of signing additional protocols. So that's something, the terminology of the in international laws we should know, and this was known as the Madrid Protocol because it was signed in the Madrid. Now talking about India's research stations. So India's research stations in Antarctica are, there are two research stations. Earlier was Dakshin Gangotri, which is now decommissioned, and now two research stations are functioning, which is known as Maitri and Bharati, which is managed by the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research, or NCPOR, which functions under the Ministry of Earth Sciences and the institute is located in Goa. Right, so let's look at the locations of these two research stations. If this is the continent of Antarctica, here is where the research station Maitri is located, and on the eastern front, the research station Bharati is located. Right, and then in November 2021, India launched its 41st scientific expedition to Antarctica. This was the major pointers with respect to how is India indulging into the scientific exploration in Antarctica. Now to further this, now the Parliament has passed the Indian Antarctic Bill of 2002. Now what are the major provisions of this bill? We'll take a look at it. So what is the rationale? To give effect to the Antarctic Treaty and Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, right? So to give the to give domestic piece of legislation effect to the treaty and to the protocol, and to prevent unlawful activities such as illegal mining, pollution, etc. in the research stations which we saw are situated in the Antarctica. And who is it applicable on? This particular bill that would be passed. So it would be applicable to the Indian citizens. So those citizens who would go to the continent of Antarctica and indulge in any activities, they would be liable under this Indian law of Antarctic law of 2022, and it would be valid on the foreign citizens of as well who are a part of the Indian research stations, plus the company registered in India. Whichever company is present in Antarctica, if it's registered in India, this piece of law would be applicable to them, and any vessel or aircraft registered in India or outside India, provided it is a part of Indian expedition to Antarctica. Now why is this being done? Because whatever the provisions of this law would be, which we'll discuss further, it would mean that all of these people who would be involved tomorrow, if there is any crime that happens or any liability that occurs, all these people would be liable under the law of India. Now let's look at the major provisions of the bill. So the major provisions are that an apex level committee would be set up. That is the Committee on Antarctic Governance and Environmental Protection, which would be headed by the Secretary of Ministry of Earth Sciences to monitor, implement and ensure compliance of the relevant international laws for the protection of Antarctic environment. So which would be the body that would deal with the implementation of this law? That would be the Committee on Antarctic Governance and Environmental Protection, headed by Secretary of the Ministry of Earth Sciences. So whenever we talk about the aspects of dealing with the continent of Antarctica, which is the ministry that comes into focus. The Ministry of Earth Sciences is the nodal ministry which deals with these aspects. So that is why the secretary of the ministry is also the head of the apex level committee under the law. Then which are the regulated activities which are enlisted in the act? So all Indian expeditions to Antarctica plus Indian stations in Antarctica, which we saw, Maitri and Bharati, plus the vessels and aircraft entering Antarctica, plus introduction of non-native animals and plants into Antarctica, all would be regulated under this act. Then how these activities would be regulated? So permit is to issued by the Committee on Antarctic Governance and Environmental Protection, or written authorization from other party to the Madrid Protocol. So what this means is that if tomorrow any person wants to visit Antarctica, be on a tourist motive or scientific exploration motive, what they have to do is they have to take permission or they have to take license from the apex level committee for visiting. No one can visit without a license. So therefore these activities would be regulated by the committee. And what are the prohibited activities in Antarctica? So nuclear explosion, disposal of radioactive wastes, material and specified substances and products. So whatever was mentioned in the Antarctic Treaty, the Antarctic Act of India as well is prohibiting the same activities. This means that India is giving effect to the international agreement by promulgating a domestic law to that effect. So this was the discussion with respect to the Antarctic Treaty and Antarctic bill that is recently passed in the Lok Sabha, which will, if and when passed in the Rajya Sabha, will get converted into the Antarctic Act of 2002. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, Law Panel to Examine Simultaneous Elections. Now this is an issue which has been talked about quite a lot in the recent times, wherein the article talks about the fact that the ruling government has given the proposal of holding simultaneous election, that is the Lok Sabha election and state assembly elections at the same time, and it has given this proposal to examine to the Law Commission. The Law Commission is a body which deals with reform in the laws. So the Law Commission will now examine this idea of holding one nation, one election. One nation, one election has been talked about as an idea by a lot of people in the recent times. Even the Prime Minister on the National Voters' Day advocated the idea of one nation, one election and one voters list, which meant that all the elections, the state assembly elections and the Lok Sabha elections, should happen at a simultaneous period. It should happen as a single time, to save time, to save resources, and to give the government ample time to indulge into developmental processes and not just run behind the election and campaigning processes. So we'll talk about this issue of one nation, one elections. What exactly is meant by this? What are the advantages of such a concept and what can be the arguments against such a concept? So what is one nation, one election? It refers to holding elections to Lok Sabha, state legislative assemblies, panchayats and urban local bodies, all the elections that exist simultaneously once in 5 years. So as of now, what happens? The general elections or the Lok Sabha elections happen at one point. Then after that election ends, in a few months, some other states assembly elections are in place. Then if that election ends, some other states are in place. So in this way, the governments are, or the parties are constantly in a fix to manage the campaigning of the election. And this diverts their time for indulging into the developmental process or governance process of the state and the nation. So that is why it is said that it can be a good idea to hold all elections at one time, be that at the national level, state level or the panchayat and urban local body level. But what are the challenges posed by the frequent elections that this idea is mooted? So what is the need for one nation, one election? So the need is that, again, as we are talking, massive expenditure. When such elections are carried out throughout 5 years and various elections are held for various levels, it results into massive expenditure. The article says that between 2014 and 2022, the central government has disbursed around rupees 7,500 crore for the expenses of holding of elections at the national, state and panchayat level. So this much is the amount that has to be spent on conducting the election. It can be saved if all the elections are held at one single point and one single period of time. So massive expenditure is the issue when we have frequent elections or continuous elections. Then second is policy paralysis occurs that results from the imposition of the model code of conduct during the election time. Now the model code of conduct which is instituted during the election time restricts the government and the other campaigners to do certain activities, as well as when continuous elections are happening, not much attention can be given to policy formulation and implementation, and this leads to policy paralysis. So that is also one of the challenges posed by frequent elections. Third is that it creates an impact of delivery of essential services. Whenever the elections are going on, the crucial activities of delivering the essential services, such as that of food delivery, ensuring food security, ensuring health, all of these services take a hit because more resources and attention is being diverted towards the election campaigning. So it impacts the delivery of essential services. Then it creates a burden on crucial manpower that is deployed during the election time. Now, as we know, the district machinery which usually functions to implement the government policies at the time of the election, it is the same body which assumes the role of conducting election. So the manpower that would have otherwise been used to carry on the governance process and delivering all these essential services and implementing the policies is now diverted to the election process, which is again a challenge that is posed by holding frequent election. Then it puts pressure on political parties, especially smaller ones, as elections are becoming increasingly expensive. Again, in order to campaign and stand in multiple elections, especially disadvantageous becomes for the small political parties who do not have that many resources to participate in elections. So these are the challenges that are posed by the current system of frequent election, that they have certain challenges, which is why the concept of one nation, one election or holding simultaneous elections at all levels is being mooted. So what can be the benefit of simultaneous elections? So the benefit can be whatever challenges that are posed by the simultaneous elections that can be rectified. So governance and consistency, the ruling parties will be able to focus on legislation and governance rather than having to be in campaign mode forever. This would be the reform that can be carried out, where after conducting election only once, the other time, the remaining time can be used for the legislation forming and governance processes, which would save time for the government. Then reduced expenditure of money and administration. As we saw, massive expenditure is done when continuous elections are being done, but one election for all levels will reduce the expenditure of money and administration. Then continuity in policies and programs. So this is one of the crucial features, which means that whenever the elections have happened once at all levels, this would ensure that the election process is over, and in the governance and policy program implementation, there is continuity. And this would also result in efficiency of governance, which would mean that populist measures by governments will reduce. Now, what do we mean by populist measures? These are those measures which are especially taken to woo the public or to appease the public, and this is especially done at the time of elections. So when this is done and elections are conducted only once, the populist measures would be reduced because the time period of the election conduct is also getting reduced. So this would result in efficiency of governance. And next is the impact of black money on the voters will be reduced, as all elections are held at one point in time. this is also touted as one of the benefits, that since the expenditure would be reduced and elections would happen at only one point in time, the impact of black money is said to substantially reduce on the voters. So these are the benefits of simultaneous elections. But are there any challenges that are posed by the concept of one nation, one election as well? So what are the arguments against simultaneous elections? First is the federal problem, which means that by conducting elections at the central level and state level and the local level all at once, there are certain problems that can arise. Simultaneous elections are almost nearly impossible to implement, as it would mean arbitrarily curtailing or extending the term of existing legislatures to bring their election dates in line with the due date for the rest of the country, and such a measure would undermine democracy and federalism. So currently the implementation problem which stands is that the terms of all state legislative assemblies are very different. When they finish their 5-year term is very different from some other states. To implement this would mean to curtail some time period for some assemblies, and that would create a problem for the federal principle. That is why one argument is saying that it is very difficult or near impossible to implement at once. Then second is that it is against the spirit of democracy. How? Critics say that forcing simultaneous elections is against democracy because trying to force an artificial cycle of elections and restricting the choice for voters is not correct. So if saving resources is the beneficial argument for such elections, restricting the choice of voters during the time of elections is the challenge that can be posed by simultaneous election. What happens is that, let's say that the voter has in some mindset voted in the national election, but it gets the hang of the performance of that particular government, and in 2 years where there is a state election, the voter can feel that he or she wants to change his vote. So he or she gets a choice of voting a different party. This choice is taken away, and this is called as being against the spirit of democracy. And then the next challenge is that regional parties would be at disadvantage. Now those parties who are established nationally would be able to execute campaigning for their simultaneous elections very well. But the regional parties are supposed to be at a disadvantage because in simultaneously held elections, voters are reportedly likely to predominantly vote one way, giving the dominant party at the center an advantage. So this therefore puts the regional parties at a point of disadvantage. And the next is that diminished accountability. What I was just talking about the situation right now, that if one national election is done and the voter feels that the performance of the government at the national level was not good, and on the state government level the voter wants to elect a different government, so this at least ensured the principle of accountability for the government. And when the simultaneous election will happen, it would decrease the accountability of the government. So having to face the electorate more than once every 5 years enhances the accountability of the politicians and keeps them on their toes. But simultaneous elections would result into diminished accountability. So these are some of the arguments against simultaneous election. So what should be the way forward? So that is why the Law Commission has been set up to identify the problems and of the pros and cons of conducting simultaneous elections, and whatever should be the beneficial way forward should be taken up, and these challenges which are posed by the simultaneous elections should be taken care of in the particular proposal. So with this we finish our today's discussion, and we'll meet again on Monday discussing the important articles from the newspaper. Thank you.